This is a story about two people, from history that has long been forgotten. Two lovebirds who had to be separated because of their circumstances. Because the world is not forgiving, but they still choose to love. Her name was Emily. His name was Thomas. And their love was not remarkable, not in the way books describe or songs remember. It did not shake empires, nor ignite feuds between families. No one ever wrote headlines about them. No portraits were painted. No poets wept over their names. It was small, quiet, the kind of love that grew like wildflowers between the roots of old trees, unseen by most, delicate yet stubborn, and more enduring than it had any right to be. They met beneath an elm. It stood at the far edge of her father's land, a place where the grass grew taller, where the wind passed differently, and where even birds seemed to pause before landing. The elm was crooked, tall, and oddly silent, too twisted to be felled for timber, too old to bloom as it once did. Locals said the tree could keep secrets, that its roots had heard more promises than any chapel in the valley. Emily had gone there to read, a habit she'd kept since childhood, barefoot, with her hair unpinned, carrying a book too large for her hands. Thomas had gone there to rest, a stranger then suntanned, dust on his sleeves, the look of someone who'd seen too much of the world already for his age. Their first words were exchanged in the shade, hesitantly, not flirtatious, not rehearsed. Just two people startled by one another's presence, then unexpectedly soothed by it. She asked what he was doing there. He asked what she was reading. She didn't answer right away. He smiled anyway. That first meeting lasted an hour. The next, a little longer. And soon, without meaning to, they began measuring the seasons by their visits to the elm. They returned every year, without fail. For birthdays, they brought each other tokens, a folded poem, a paper bird, a ribbon dyed the color of creek water. For first kisses, they stood with their backs against the bark, unsure who leaned in first. For arguments, some bitter, some wordless, they sat on opposite roots until one offered a hand. And for silence, they simply leaned against one another, the way shadows lean when the sun sets low. And then, one spring, they returned to the tree to say goodbye. In the spring of 1917, the world split open. There were no trumpets, no parades, just the slow tightening of letters from the capital and the sound of trains leaving more often than they arrived. Thomas had no choice. Most men didn't. The notice came folded in thirds, stamped with a seal that looked like rust. He opened it in silence beneath the elm. Emily read it over his shoulder and said nothing. There was no need. When the day came, he wore a coat that didn't quite fit, borrowed from a neighbor, patched at the elbows. He carried a worn book of poems Emily had marked up just for him, the pages full of scribbled thoughts and little flowers pressed flat between stanzas. And tucked deep into the inside lining of his coat, hidden behind the seam where the fabric was loosest, was a photograph of Emily, faded already, her hair wind-tossed, her smile crooked, his favorite version of her. At the station, the air tasted of coal smoke and regret. She straightened his collar and fastened the last button with trembling fingers. "Write to me," she said, quiet but firm, the way someone might ask a dying fire to hold on just a little longer. "I will," he promised, "even if I lose my hands." She tried to smile. "Come back to the elm," she whispered, standing on her toes to reach his ear. He didn't answer with words. He only nodded. Once, the train screamed. The doors closed, and he was gone. For 6 months, Emily wrote him letters. Gentle ones. Mundane ones. Unapologetically ordinary. She told him about the garden, how the frost had taken the lavender early that year. About the old dog, how he still waited at the gate every evening. About her dreams, how sometimes she saw Thomas beside her, quiet, watching her sleep. Some letters were a single page. Others spilled across 10. Sometimes she just described the wind, or the color of the morning sky, or how the elm looked lonelier than usual. She sent one every Thursday without fail, wrapped in brown paper, tied with twine. And for the first 3 months, Thomas had never failed to write back to her. He wrote about his days in the barrack. He wrote about his friends wanting to go back to their families. He wrote about how he could give up his life just to meet her right now. He even wrote how excited he was because he finally can meet her next spring. Emily smiled, happy that she could finally meet her husband again. Yet, suddenly, the letters stopped. It was so abrupt that it was impossible to believe. But she kept on writing, hoping that the replies would finally come. The postmaster came to expect her. He would tilt his head as she entered, already reaching for the form. He never had anything to give in return. The other women received letters. Folded sheets, ink-smudged, sometimes with blood on the corners or spelling that stumbled. But still letters. Evidence of breath. Of someone thinking of them across oceans and trenches. But Emily's mailbox stayed hollow, echoing. Still, she waited. Every Thursday, she returned to the post office. Every Thursday, the postmaster shook his head with a little more sorrow in his eyes. He had no new words to offer, only silence softened by habit. Then, in January, the telegram arrived. She didn't remember opening it, just the feel of the paper in her hand. Too thin, too final. Missing, presumed dead. Location, near Eastern Ridge. No remains recovered. That was all. No rank. No last known words. Not even a date. Just the confirmation that absence was now official. She didn't cry. She couldn't even begin to cry. Instead, she walked. All the way across the frozen fields to the edge of her father's land. Boots crunching over brittle frost and sleeping roots. The elm stood waiting. The bark was darker that winter, slick with snowmelt. The carving they had once made, their initials clumsily etched into the trunk with a pocket knife, had softened with time. The heart around them had cracked slightly, like a wound healed poorly. Or perhaps the tree was trying to forget too. She pressed her palm to the trunk. It was colder than she expected. The wind carried the sound of sobbing of someone deeply in love with her man. Then she went home. That night, by candlelight, Emily wrote one final letter. It was short. No garden news. No weather notes. No poems scribbled in the margins. Just a single line, written in ink that trembled with restraint. If you're dead, forget me. But if you're alive, I'll be waiting under our elm tree. She folded the page carefully, wrapped it in soft linen, the kind her mother once used to wrap christening gowns. She added a sprig of dried lavender from the jar above her stove, the last of the harvest he never saw. And just before dawn, she returned to the elm. The ground was hard from frost. She dug anyway, barehanded. No shovel, just determination. She buried the letter beneath the roots, deep enough that no animal or wind could find it, but shallow enough that the tree might know it was there. Then she sat against the trunk, breathing into her hands, watching the first light rise over the empty field. She waited, not for a letter, not even for a sign, just in case. Years passed. The war ended. Men returned. Some were limping. Some didn't speak. Some were strangers in their own bodies. But Thomas was not among them. Emily never remarried. She grew older the way forgotten songs fade, slowly, gently, without ceremony. Every spring, she returned to the elm. Sometimes she brought a book. Sometimes she brought wine. She never brought company. People whispered. Her sisters called it unhealthy. The new postmaster, much younger now, didn't know her name. But she waited anyway. In the spring of 1935, 18 years after he left, a stranger came to the elm. He was young, quiet, too young to remember the war, but old enough to carry its shadows. He walked with the slow, deliberate steps of someone moving through someone else's memory, careful not to disturb it. His boots sank into the soft soil of early thaw, and his eyes searched the horizon as if expecting someone to stop him. No one did. In his coat pocket, folded carefully between layers of wax paper, was a photograph torn, creased, and blurred with water damage. Only half a face remained. A sliver of a woman's jaw, the edge of a smile, the top button of a dress. That was all. And tucked behind the photo was a letter. Not long. Just a few lines, written in the shaky hand of a dying man whose breath had grown too thin to finish most sentences. The young man had served under Thomas in the final months of the war. His name was Merrick. He had never known Emily, only heard of her in fragments, and muttered words from a hospital cot, spoken between fits of fever. But in those final days, Thomas had spoken of nothing else. He had been injured while dragging Merrick from a collapsing trench, shrapnel slicing deep near his ribs. There was no dramatic rescue, no last charge. Just mud, pain, and then weeks of slow decline in a field hospital far from any map border. Merrick had stayed by his side, unsure why. Perhaps it was guilt. Perhaps duty. Or perhaps because, in those last weeks, Thomas began to speak not like a soldier, but like a man reaching for something long lost. He spoke of a tree. Crooked, tall, he would whisper, eyes closed. Wind always to the left, her scent still on the bark. He spoke of a woman, of her voice, of her hands, of a letter never read. He told Merrick that the tree was the only place he'd ever felt entirely alive, that if the wind still moved there, she might still be listening. And then, one night, he pressed the torn photo into Marek's hands. She'll know, he said. If she's there, she'll know. Thomas died the next morning. Quietly. No ceremony. Just a stillness too deep to break. Merrick did not return home right away. Instead, he carried that photo across 2 countries and over a decade of silence. He tried, once, to find Emily through records, but the town had changed. The old names had faded. People had moved, died, rebuilt. The war had erased more than lives. It had erased continuity. The name, Emily, meant nothing to the new villagers. Even when he found the edge of the land once owned by her family, no one could tell him who lived there now. No one remembered the girl who read beneath the elm. But Merrick had memorized Thomas' final description. Crooked tree, tall, wind to the left, carved bark, waiting. He followed instinct, gut, ghost, something in between. And then, there it was. The elm, still standing, still watching. Crooked as ever, tall against the dusk, its branches trembling in a wind Merrick could not explain. The field around it had grown wild, no longer trimmed or watched. But the tree remained untouched, as if something had been left unfinished, and nature knew better than to interfere. Merrick approached slowly. He did not speak. Instead, he knelt, right at the base of the trunk, where the roots split like fingers reaching into the past, and began to dig. Carefully, gently, he placed the photograph beneath the soil, along with the folded note. No gravestone, no cross, just the dirt, the bark, and the wind. The note said only, even if time forgets our names, the wind remembers where we stood. He pressed his hand to the tree, once, then turned and walked away. He did not look back. That evening, as she had every spring since the war ended, Emily returned to the elm. The light was already fading when she arrived. The sky had turned to bruised lavender, and birds had gone silent. She felt it before she saw it, a kind of pressure in the air, like a memory taking shape around her. Something was different. The ground near the base was uneven, looser. The scent of the soil was fresh, too recently turned. She knelt, carefully, brushing aside a few fallen leaves. Her fingers found what the earth had not fully buried. Not a letter, not linen, not lavender. A photograph. Worn, torn, faded. At first, she thought it might have been something she dropped long ago, but she never remembered burying a photo. And this one was strange. It was her, or it could have been, but the face was incomplete. The smile, obscured by water stains. The hands, unfamiliar. Only the silhouette of her hair remained, and even that, uncertain. She held it like it might vanish, and part of her wished it would. There was no name, no message, just this ghost of an image, pressed between time and dirt. She didn't understand. And in a way, perhaps that was mercy. She never knew Thomas had returned, not in flesh, but in memory, through the hands of a man who had heard his final breath and carried it across years like a quiet torch. She never knew he had spoken of her until the very end. Never knew he had tried, in his broken, final way, to keep his promise. But something inside her shifted. She folded the photo and placed it in her sewing kit, between the spools of thread and a red ribbon Thomas had once admired. The same one she wore on the day they met. She never returned to the tree again. And when Emily died, many winters later, quietly, in a house more empty than not, there were only 3 things of note in her drawer. A torn photo, yellowed with age, a dried scrap of lavender, and a letter, unsent, sealed in linen, its words now faded to the color of memory.